a quiet archive record. Tonight, we're stepping into a slow unfolding. Settle in. Let the outside world dissolve and gently descend into tonight's world. Tonight, we will walk a narrow path through a handful of old Zen stories, the kind that do not try to impress you, the kind that do not ask you to believe anything, only to notice what is already here. A student arrives with a mind full of answers. A master pours tea until the cup overflows. Another student listens for wisdom in the wind and discovers that the wind is not the one moving. We will pass through simple rooms, a small hut, a moonlit courtyard, the sound of a bowl being washed, and the quiet shock of a single sentence that breaks a lifetime of thinking. These are stories and lessons of Zen masters, not as history, but as a mirror held up to your own attention. This is Zen Master Stories, The Empty Cup and the Wind. Chapter 1. The cup that could not hold. The student had traveled a long way to reach the old teacher. In his village, people spoke of the teacher the way they spoke of mountains, as if the man had always been there, as if the air around him carried a different weight. The student arrived with a pack on his back, dust on his sandals, and a mind that was already speaking. He had prepared questions for weeks. He had arranged them in a careful order, like stones laid out along a path. He had rehearsed them in his head during long stretches of road, while fields passed by, while rain tapped the leaves, while the world kept breathing around him. When he finally stepped into the teacher's small room, he bowed deeply. The teacher was seated at a low table. The room was plain. A kettle breathed a thin ribbon of steam. The teacher did not look grand. He looked like a man who had been sitting there for a long time, and might sit there for a long time more. The student began to speak at once. He asked about the nature of mind. He asked about suffering. He asked about the difference between emptiness and nothingness. He asked about meditation and whether it was a method or a recognition. He asked about effort and whether effort was another form of grasping. He asked whether the world was real or whether it was a dream. The teacher listened without interrupting. His face did not change. He did not nod. He did not frown. He simply listened, the way a lake receives rain, without deciding whether the rain is clever. When the student paused to take a breath, the teacher reached for the teapot. He lifted it carefully and began to pour. The cup filled. The student continued speaking, as if the pouring were only background. He began to add more examples, more references, more arguments he had collected from books and other teachers. The tea rose to the rim. The teacher continued to pour. Tea spilled over the edge, ran down the side, and pooled on the table. The student stopped. He stared at the cup and then at the teacher. "Master," he said, "the cup is full. No more will go in." The teacher kept pouring for a moment longer, then set the pot down. The kettle breathed. The room remained still. "You are like this cup," the teacher said. "How can I show you anything? Until you first empty yourself." The student's face tightened. His mind rushed to defend itself. He wanted to say that his questions were sincere. He wanted to say that his knowledge was not pride, that he had studied because he cared. But he also saw the tea on the table, the simple fact of it, and the way the teacher had not needed a long speech to make a point. He looked at his own thoughts, crowding one another, eager to be first. He realized that even his desire to learn might be another way of holding on. In that moment, the room felt larger, not because the walls moved, but because something in him loosened. He became aware of the air on his skin. He heard the kettle. He noticed the quiet between sounds. The teacher did not ask him to confess anything. He did not ask the student to renounce knowledge. He did not demand humility as a performance. He simply let the tea cool. Outside, a branch shifted in the wind. The student finally spoke again. This time his voice was smaller. "How do I empty the cup?" he asked. The teacher did not answer quickly. He lifted the cup, looked into it, as if it were a simple mirror. "When you notice it is full," he said, "you have already begun." The student waited, expecting more. The teacher did not give more. The student felt irritation rise. Then he felt the irritation as a sensation, a tightening, a heat. He watched it. It changed. It faded. He realized that the teacher was not withholding. He was pointing. It was not an insult to have a full cup. It was simply a condition. The student remembered the long road that brought him here. On that road, he had carried his questions like a shield. They made him feel safe. If he could name the problem, he could control it. If he could categorize his experience, he could avoid being surprised. But the teacher had surprised him with something ordinary. Tea, a cup, spilling. Now the student saw another layer to the story. It was not only about being arrogant. It was about how the mind rushes ahead, how it cannot sit still long enough to receive. The teacher poured again, but this time he poured into an empty bowl, not a cup. The tea spread out, shallow. It steamed quietly. "Look," he said. The student looked. Nothing spectacular happened, and yet something did. The student could not pretend the bowl was deeper than it was. He could not pretend it could hold a mountain. He could only see the tea as it was. That night, the student slept in a small corner of the room. He heard the wind outside. He heard animals in the dark. He heard his own thoughts trying to make plans. At some point, he realized he had been chasing an experience, some dramatic moment that would prove he was changing. He had been trying to fill the cup with a special taste, but he had already tasted the tea. It was warm. It was bitter. It was simple. In the morning, the teacher gave the student a task. "Wash the cups," he said. The student wanted to laugh. After all his questions, after all his travel, wash cups. He almost protested. Then he saw his own mind again. The cup was filling. So he washed the cups. He felt the water. He smelled the tea leaves. He heard the clink of ceramic. He noticed how quickly his mind wandered, how quickly it tried to turn even washing into a step towards something else. And each time he noticed, he returned. The teacher watched without comment. Days passed like this. The student asked fewer questions, not because he had become lazy, but because his questions started to sound different in the silence. They began to feel like waves on the surface of something deeper, something that did not need to be named. One afternoon, the student sat with the teacher and admitted something. "When I am quiet," he said, "I feel afraid." The teacher nodded once. "Good," he said. The student blinked. "Good?" The teacher poured tea into the student's cup, but he did not let it overflow. He stopped at the rim. "Fear is not a mistake," he said. "It is a sign that the cup is being emptied. When the noise fades, what remains can be seen." The student looked down into the tea. He saw his reflection. It trembled. He realized that his knowledge had been more than a collection of ideas. It had been a way of not feeling fear. If he could explain the world, maybe he would not have to meet it. But the world was here, and the tea was warm. Later, when the student left the teacher, he carried fewer things. His pack was lighter, not because he had thrown away books, but because he had stopped carrying certainty like a heavy stone. On the road, he watched the wind move the grass. He thought of the spilling tea. He smiled, not because he had solved the mystery, but because he had finally noticed the cup. And in that noticing, there was room. The student kept walking, and as he walked, he began to notice the subtle ways the cup tried to refill itself. Sometimes it refilled with old phrases he had memorized. Sometimes it refilled with the desire to be a better person. Sometimes it refilled with the hope that the teacher would be proud of him. Sometimes it refilled with the fear that he was failing. He would catch himself rehearsing how he would tell the story later. He would imagine other people listening, nodding, admiring him for having met a master. In those moments, his attention left the road. He was already somewhere else. Then a small thing would pull him back. A bird calling, the scrape of stone under his sandal, the smell of wet earth, a single leaf spinning as it fell. He began to understand that emptying the cup was not a single heroic act. It was 1,000 small returns. At night, when he lay down to sleep, he would sometimes remember the teacher's face as the tea spilled. The teacher had not been angry. He had not been amused. He had simply poured as if to say, "This is what you are doing to yourself." The student realized that this was how his mind treated everything. It poured attention into a single idea until the idea overflowed and spilled to suffering. He poured attention into regret until regret became a flood. He poured attention into fear until fear became a storm. He poured attention into desire until desire became hunger that could not be satisfied. And still, beneath the pouring, the world remained simple. A cup, tea, a table. The student began to practice a small experiment. When he noticed his mind pouring, he would pause and name the action softly to himself, not as judgment, but as a reminder. Pouring, he would think. Then he would feel his feet. He would feel his breath. He would let the cup be empty for a moment. At first, the emptiness felt like a lack, like losing something important. But after some weeks, emptiness began to feel like space, like the sky opening after a long storm. He realized that the mind hates space because space cannot be controlled. Space cannot be owned. Space does not flatter. Yet space is what allows everything to happen. On a certain morning, the student passed an old farmer working in a field. The farmer was bent over, pulling weeds. His movement was steady. He did not look like a man seeking enlightenment. He looked like a man doing what needed to be done. The student watched for a while. The farmer finally looked up and nodded once, not as greeting, but as acknowledgement that someone else existed. The student bowed. The farmer returned to his work. The student felt a strange warmth in his chest. He realized that the farmer's attention was not divided. The farmer was not pouring tea into a full cup. He was simply pulling weeds. The student wondered if this too was practice. He continued walking. He did not decide anything. He did not write a rule for himself. He just kept noticing. In the afternoons, when the light fell through branches, he would sometimes feel a quiet gratitude. not gratitude for a special teaching, gratitude for the fact that he could finally hear the kettle in his own life. He understood that the teacher had not given him a new belief. The teacher had given him a direction, back to the breath, back to the body, back to the moment before the mind labels, back to the cup. And as the student walked, he began to see that every moment offered the same lesson. The world was always pouring something into him: sound, light, sensation. The mind was always trying to decide what it meant, but meaning was not the same as experience. Experience came first. The student learned to rest there, even briefly. When he returned to his village months later, people asked him what the master had taught. He almost told them the tea story. Then he noticed the impulse to perform. He smiled. He said, "He taught me to listen." They looked disappointed. He did not try to fix their disappointment. He watched the wind move the grass. He felt his breath, and he knew that the cup would always try to fill, and he knew that he could always notice. Chapter 2. The wind that moves everything. In another place, in another season, a different student came to a monastery built on a hillside. The buildings were plain. The air smelled of pine and smoke. The student arrived on a day when clouds moved quickly across the sky. He had heard a story about a flag in the wind. He wanted to understand it. He believed that if he could understand it, he would understand Zen. He found the master in the courtyard. A flag hung from a pole. The wind pulled it and released it in slow waves. The student bowed and said, "Master, I have a question." The master looked at the flag, then at the student. "Ask," he said. The student pointed to the flag. "Is it the flag that moves?" he asked. "Or is it the wind that moves?" The master did not answer at once. He walked to the flagpole. He placed his hand on the pole. He felt the vibration of the wind through it. The flag snapped softly. The student waited. Finally, the master said, "Neither the flag nor the wind moves." The student frowned. He wanted to argue. The flag clearly moved. The wind clearly moved. "What do you mean?" he asked. The master turned to him. "Mine moves," he said. The student felt a small shock. The words were simple, but they changed the shape of the question. He had been treating the world like a puzzle. He had been trying to locate the answer in objects, but the master had pointed back at the one who was asking. The student looked again at the flag. Now he noticed something else. He noticed how quickly his mind labeled what he saw. He noticed how it divided the scene into parts: flag, wind, pole, sky, answer, wrong answer. He noticed that the movement of the flag was not only in the cloth, it was also in his attention, shifting, grasping, deciding. The master said, "When you look, you create the world you think you see." The student protested. "The flag is still there whether I look or not." The master nodded. "Yes," he said, "and your suffering is still there whether you look or not." The student was silent. The master continued. "You come here to fix your life," he said. "You come to make the wind stop. You come to make the flag hang perfectly still. You come to find a calm that cannot be disturbed." The student felt exposed. It was true. He wanted a calm that was guaranteed. The master touched the student's chest lightly with 2 fingers. "Can you feel this?" he asked. The student nodded. "This is moving too," the master said. The student felt his heartbeat. He felt breath rise and fall. The master said, "If you demand that everything stop, you demand that you die. Zen is not about stopping. It is about seeing. The student listened. The wind continued to move the flag. The master told him to sit and watch the flag for an hour. Do not think about it, the master said. Do not make a theory. Just watch. The student sat. At first his mind raced. He tried to solve the riddle. He tried to remember what he had read. He tried to form an interpretation that would impress the master. But after some time, the mind tired itself. The wind kept moving. The flag kept moving. The student kept breathing. He began to notice that the movement was not separate from stillness. The flag moved, and between movements there was a pause. The wind came, and in the space after, there was quiet. Thoughts rose, and in the space after, there was a kind of open awareness. The student realized that he had been trying to choose between flag and wind, as if one must be the truth and the other must be false. But the master was not offering a new answer. He was breaking the habit of choosing. When the hour ended, the student stood and bowed. I do not understand, he said. The master smiled slightly. Good, he said. The student felt the same irritation as the first student in the tea story. Good? Again, the master said. Understanding is a flag too. It moves in the wind. It snaps. It makes noise. It attracts your attention. It is not useless, but it is not the sky. The student looked up. Clouds moved. Light changed. The sky held everything without effort. The master asked, "What is the sky doing?" The student hesitated. "Nothing," he said. The master nodded. "And yet it contains everything," he said. The student sat again. He watched clouds. He watched the flag. He watched his mind. That night, he dreamed of a great wind sweeping through a forest. In the dream, he tried to hold the trees still with his hands. He strained. He grew tired. The wind did not stop. In the dream, he finally let go. The trees moved. The wind moved. He watched. He woke with a strange calm. The next day, the master gave him another task. When you hear the wind, he said, do not say wind. When you see the flag, do not say flag. When you feel your mind move, do not say mind. The student asked, what should I say? The master replied, say nothing. Look, the student tried. At first it was impossible. Words appeared like insects. Labels crawled over everything. But slowly, sometimes, the student would catch a moment before the label. A pure sound, a pure color, a movement without explanation. Those moments were brief, but they were real. In one moment, the student heard the flag snap, and for an instant the sound was just sound. Not meaning, not lesson, not metaphor, just sound. He felt something in him soften. He realized that his mind was always moving, even when the flag was still. He realized that the world he suffered in was partly a world his mind kept building. And yet, he also realized he could not simply stop building. The mind would move, so the practice was not to kill the mind. The practice was to see it. One afternoon, the master and student walked along a ridge. The wind was strong. It pulled at their robes. The student said, if mind moves, does that mean the world is only mind? The master stopped. He picked up a small stone and held it. If I drop this, he asked, will it fall? Yes, the student said. The master dropped the stone. It fell. The master said, do not be confused. The world is not a dream you can control, and your suffering is not an enemy outside you. They meet here. He tapped the student's forehead gently. He tapped the student's chest. Here, he said. The student nodded, not because he had a perfect concept, but because the gesture was clear. The wind moved the grass. The student felt the wind on his face. He did not name it. Later, the student tried to practice the master's instruction in small ways. When he saw the flag, he did not immediately say flag. When he heard the wind, he did not immediately say wind. This seemed easy in theory, but in practice the mind moved faster than he expected. The labels arrived almost before the sensation. The mind did not wait for permission. It stamped everything with a name, as if naming were a way of owning. He began to see how much of his life he lived inside labels: friend, enemy, success, failure, good, bad. He noticed that the label was not neutral. Each label carried a story and a tension. Friend meant safety. Enemy meant threat. Success meant relief. Failure meant shame. He realized that his mind was not only moving, it was constantly negotiating. The master took him to the dining hall one afternoon. The monks were eating silently. The bowls were simple. The food was plain. The master said quietly, "Notice how the rice tastes before the word rice." The student tried. For a moment, there was taste without commentary, just warmth, texture, salt. Then the mind returned with its opinions. Too bland. Not enough. I like this. I do not like that. The student felt discouraged. The master said, "Do not try to win. Just notice the return." The student began to understand that the point was not to eliminate labels forever. The point was to see their movement and to stop obeying them automatically. The master said, "When you believe your label, you live in a smaller world." The student asked, "What is the larger world?" The master lifted his bowl and tapped it with a spoon. The sound was clear. "This," he said. The student listened. He heard the sound and felt something open. Not an idea, a sensation of space. The master said, "You think Zen is an answer to a question, but it is an answer to the habit of questioning." The student did not fully understand, but he felt the truth of the direction. That evening, the student walked alone along the ridge again. The wind was gentler. The flag in the courtyard hung almost still. He noticed that even when the flag did not move, his mind still did. It replayed conversations. It predicted the future. It judged the past. It tried to harvest meaning from everything. He saw that the mind did not need wind to move. It carried its own weather. And yet, he also noticed that he could watch. The watching was quiet. The watching did not argue. The watching did not demand that the mind stop. It simply witnessed. He realized that the watching was like the sky in the master's earlier question. It held everything without effort. For a few minutes, he rested in that. Then a thought came. "I am doing it." And he smiled, because he saw the thought as another flag. He let it pass. The wind moved. The flag moved. The mind moved. And still, there was something that did not have to move with it. The student wanted to keep that recognition, to turn it into a permanent shelter. The moment he tried, it slipped. He felt the mind grasp again, and he felt disappointed. He went to the master and said, "Yesterday, I felt something open, and today it is gone." The master asked, "Who took it away?" The student said, "I do not know." The master said, "Then do not accuse the day." The student did not understand. The master led him to the bell in the courtyard. The bell was large and old. The metal was dark. The rope was frayed from years of hands. The master struck the bell once. A deep sound rolled through the air. The student listened. The sound rose, held, and then faded. The master said, "Where did the sound go?" The student said, "It faded." The master asked, "Did you lose it?" The student hesitated. No, he said. The master asked, "Then why do you call the opening gone?" The student stood in silence. He felt the teaching in the shape of the bell's sound. The opening was not an object. It was not a possession. It was a moment of not grabbing. The master struck the bell again. The student listened. This time, he noticed how the mind wanted to hold the sound, to capture it, to freeze it at its peak. The mind could not. The sound became quieter. It dissolved into the courtyard. The master said, "Your life is like this. You cannot hold it. You cannot keep it from fading. But you can listen." The student felt tears prick his eyes. He had been trying to build a permanent state. He had been trying to become a person who would never lose the opening. The master said, "Do not build a house out of a moment. Let moments come and go. Let the sky remain." The student bowed. From then on, the student practiced listening, not only to bells and wind, but to the small movements of his own body. He listened to his breath when it was shallow. He listened to his breath when it was deep. He listened to the tightness in his jaw when he was anxious. He listened to the softness in his shoulders when he was calm. He noticed that each sensation came and went like the bell. He noticed that each thought came and went like the flag. He noticed that each mood came and went like clouds. He began to feel less betrayed by change, and in that, he felt more free. One evening, as the sun set, the master and student sat facing the valley. A thin line of light rested on the horizon. The air was clear. The world looked almost painted. The student said, "Sometimes I feel like I am close, and sometimes I feel like I am far." The master asked, "Close to what?" The student did not know. The master said, "The idea of close and far is another flag." The student sighed. The master said, "Sit, breathe, let the wind do what it does." The student sat. He did not become a new person. He simply listened. Chapter 3. Wash your bowl. There was a monastery in a valley where the mornings were cold. The stones held the night for a long time. When the monks woke before dawn, their breath looked like smoke. A young monk lived there who wanted enlightenment the way a thirsty man wants water. He wanted it urgently. He wanted it now. He wanted it to erase every doubt. He had heard that a certain master in the monastery was famous for cutting through confusion. The young monk believed the master had a secret. He believed the master could give it. One morning, after breakfast, the monk approached the master. "Master," he said, "I have been practicing hard. I meditate. I study. I keep the precepts. Tell me, what is the next step?" The master looked at him. "Have you eaten your rice?" he asked. "Yes," the monk said. "Then wash your bowl," the master said. The monk froze. He had expected a teaching. He had expected a method. He had expected an answer that would make him feel progress. He held his bowl in his hands. It was dirty. A thin film of rice clung to it. The master turned away and began to sweep the floor. The monk stood there, bowl in hand, and felt insulted. But he also felt something else, a small crack in his desire. He went to the washing area. Cold water ran over his fingers. He scrubbed the bowl. He watched the rice loosen and drift away. He noticed his mind still chasing the teaching. Why did he say that? What does it mean? Is washing the bowl a metaphor? Is he testing me? Should I feel humble? Should I feel grateful? He scrubbed harder. Then he noticed the water. He noticed the cold. He noticed the sound. The questions faded for a moment. In that moment, there was only washing. He did not become enlightened like a lightning strike. The world did not change color. The monks did not gather to clap. But something happened. He noticed how often his mind lived in the next step. He noticed how it treated this moment as a hallway to another moment. He realized he had been using practice as a way to avoid practice. He went back to the master. "Master," he said, "I washed my bowl." The master nodded. "Good," he said. The young monk felt the familiar irritation. "Good again." The words sounded like a door closing. He said, "But what is the meaning?" The master continued sweeping. "Meaning is rice in the bowl," he said. "You keep it to taste later, but it spoils." The monk did not know what to say. The master said, "When you are hungry, eat. When you are done, wash." The monk looked at the broom. The master swept small dust into a pile. The monk began to see that the master was not against meaning. He was against delay, against making life into an endless commentary. The monk asked, "But what about enlightenment?" The master stopped sweeping. He looked directly at the monk. "Where is your bowl?" he asked. The monk looked down. He was not holding it. "It is washed," he said. The master nodded. "And where is your mind?" he asked. The monk swallowed. The master said, "You want enlightenment to be somewhere else, but it is not elsewhere. It is not a trophy. It is not a story you can tell yourself." The monk felt his chest tighten. The master said, "When the bowl is dirty, you wash it. When the mind is dirty, you see it." The monk asked, "How?" The master said, "Wash your bowl." The monk laughed once, despite himself. He finally heard the teaching in the repetition. It was not clever. It was not complicated. It was a return. From that day on, the monk began to treat small tasks differently. He swept, he cooked, he carried water. Each time his mind tried to escape into ideas, he returned to the feel of the work. This did not solve all his problems. He still got angry. He still felt anxious. He still dreamed. But he noticed something new. When he returned to the moment, his anger changed faster. His anxiety loosened more quickly. His dreams felt less like prison. He was beginning to see that the mind that wanted enlightenment was also the mind that created suffering. One day, a traveler visited the monastery. The traveler asked the young monk what Zen was. The monk smiled. "Have you eaten?" he asked. The traveler said yes. "Then wash your bowl," the monk said. The traveler looked confused. The monk watched the confusion. He did not rush to fix it. He simply watched. The traveler eventually laughed. The monk laughed too. And in that simple, shared moment, the monk felt something quiet and ordinary. Not an achievement. Not a result. Just this. The young monk began to understand the danger of turning simplicity into another achievement. He noticed that his mind would sometimes say, "I am practicing well. I am being present. I am washing the bowl the right way." He would feel a small pride, and then he would feel the pride as tension in his throat and chest. He asked the master about it. The master did not scold him. He simply asked, "Who wants to be a good monk?" The young monk answered quickly, "I do." The master said, "Then watch that one." The young monk sat with this instruction. He realized that the one who wanted to be good was the same one who feared being bad. It was the same one who wanted to be safe. It was the same one who wanted to be seen. He saw that even spiritual practice could become a costume. One afternoon, a storm passed through the valley. Rain came hard and sudden. Water ran off the roofs in sheets. The courtyard filled with puddles. The young monk had been assigned to carry firewood from the shed to the kitchen. The path was slick. He slipped once and dropped a bundle of wood into the mud. He felt shame flare. He felt anger at the rain. He felt anger at the task. He felt anger at himself. Then he remembered the bowl. He bent down and picked up the wood. He wiped it as best he could. He carried it anyway. In the kitchen, an older monk saw the wet wood and frowned. The young monk braced for criticism. The older monk said only, "Put it near the stove." The young monk did. The older monk began to slice vegetables. His hands were steady. He did not seem bothered by wet wood or rain. The young monk watched him for a moment and felt something soften. He realized that the older monk was not adding extra suffering. Rain was rain. Mud was mud. Wood was wet. That was already enough. The young monk asked, "How do you stay calm?" The older monk did not stop slicing. "I do not stay calm," he said. "I return." "Return to what?" the young monk asked. The older monk said, "To the knife, to the breath, to the next slice." The young monk felt the teaching land in his body. It was the same teaching, again, in a different voice. That night, the young monk washed bowls after dinner. There were many bowls. The water grew cloudy. His hands wrinkled. At first he felt boredom. Then he felt boredom as a sensation. He watched it. It changed. He realized that boredom was another label, another story, another demand that the moment be different. He kept washing. In the sound of water and ceramic, he began to sense something quiet beneath the stories. Not a special feeling, more like a simple steadiness. He understood that Zen was not about having constant peace. It was about not being enslaved by the mind's demand that the moment be other than it is. He looked at the bowl in his hands. It was just a bowl. And yet, it held his entire life. Chapter 4. The Moon in the Water. A monk once asked a master, "What is the pure teaching?" The master did not answer with a sermon. He led the monk to a pond behind the monastery. It was night. The air was cool. The pond was still. The moon hung above them like a silent lantern. Its reflection rested on the water. The master pointed to the reflection. "There," he said. The monk leaned forward. He saw the moon in the water. It looked so clear that he felt he could touch it. He reached out. His fingers broke the surface. The moon shattered into ripples. The monk pulled his hand back and stared. The moon was gone. Then, slowly, as the water became still, the reflection returned. The master said, "Your mind is like this water." The monk listened. "When it is still, the moon appears," the master said. "When you grasp, it breaks." The monk said, "So I must keep my mind still." The master shook his head. "If you try to keep it still, you are already stirring it," he said. The monk did not understand. The master picked up a small stick and placed it gently on the water. The stick floated. The reflection of the moon still appeared around it. The master said, "Stillness is not the absence of anything. It is the absence of grabbing." The monk watched. He remembered how often he had tried to force calm. He had clenched his jaw in meditation. He had tightened his body. He had demanded silence from his thoughts. He realized that demand was another ripple. The master said, "The moon is not in the water. The moon is in the sky." The monk nodded. The master said, "And yet the water shows it." The monk felt something in him shift. He began to see that thoughts and experiences were reflections, not meaningless, but not the thing itself. He asked, "Then what is the thing itself?" The master looked at him. The master said, "Who is asking?" The monk felt the question land in his chest. It was not an intellectual puzzle. It was a direct turning. He looked inward, searching for the one who asked. He found thoughts. He found feelings. He found sensations. He found memories. He found a sense of self. But when he tried to grab that self, it moved, like the moon in the water. The master said, "Do not touch the moon." The monk said, "Then what do I do?" The master said, "Look." They stood by the pond in silence. The monk watched the reflection. He watched the water. He watched the sky. He noticed that the moon did not care whether the water was still. The moon simply was. He noticed that even when the water rippled, the moon was not harmed. He realized that the reflections of his mind did not harm what was deeper. He realized that his suffering came from mistaking reflections for reality and from trying to control them. The master said, "When you are angry, the moon is still there." The monk nodded. "When you are afraid, the moon is still there." The monk nodded. "When you are happy, the moon is still there." The monk nodded. The master said, "Stop measuring your practice by the surface." The monk felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from relief. He had been judging himself by how still he could make the water, but the master was telling him to stop trying to force the surface. The master said, "Do not chase the reflection. Do not fear the ripples. Just see." The monk bowed. Later, back in his room, the monk sat quietly. Thoughts came. He did not fight them. He did not indulge them. He watched. Sometimes the water was still. Sometimes it was not. But the moon was always there. In the days that followed, the monk returned to the pond often. He did not go to chase an experience. He went because the pond was honest. When the water was disturbed by rain, the reflection broke. When the water was calm, the reflection returned. The pond did not pretend. It did not argue about philosophy. The monk began to see how often he tried to make his mind pretend. He tried to look calm when he was not. He tried to appear wise when he was confused. He tried to speak softly when his heart was loud. He realized that this pretending was also a ripple, a constant agitation. One night, he sat by the pond and heard frogs calling from the reeds. The sound was rhythmic, persistent, ordinary. He watched his mind react. At first, he wanted the frogs to be quiet so he could meditate. Then he noticed the desire. Then he noticed the irritation. Then he noticed the way he wanted control. He remembered the teacher saying, "Stillness is the absence of grabbing." He tried an experiment. He let the frogs call. He let the wind move. He let thoughts come. He did not try to make the water perfectly still. And in that allowing, something changed. The sounds became part of the night instead of an enemy. The thoughts became passing weather instead of commands. The monk felt a quiet friendliness toward the world. He realized that much of his suffering had come from treating experience as a problem to solve. Now he treated it as a field to observe. The next day, another monk asked him, "What did you learn from the pond?" He almost answered with a clever phrase. Then he noticed the impulse to be impressive. He said simply, "When I try to hold the moon, I lose it." The other monk looked puzzled. The monk smiled. He did not try to explain further. He knew that explanation could become a finger. He knew that each person had to look at their own water. Chapter 5. A finger pointing. A man came to a master and said, "Teach me the truth." The master raised his finger. The man stared at the finger. The master said nothing. The man grew impatient. "Is this a trick?" he asked. The master kept his finger raised. The man said, I asked for the truth. The master finally spoke. Look, he said. The man looked at the finger more carefully. He examined the nail. He examined the wrinkles. He tried to interpret the gesture. The master sighed. The man said, I do not see it. The master said, my finger points to the moon. Do not mistake the finger for the moon. The man felt embarrassed. He realized he had been staring at the instruction instead of what it indicated. But then he felt another confusion. Where is the moon? He asked. The master lowered his finger and looked at the man. If I point, you stare at the finger, he said. If I do not point, you demand that I point. Either way, you miss the moon. The man felt anger rise. He wanted the master to be clear. He wanted the master to give him something he could hold. The master said, when you look for the moon, you are already too late. The man asked, then how? The master said, stop trying to take it. The man sat down heavily. He said, I do not know how. The master nodded. Good, he said. The man almost laughed in frustration. Good again. The master said, if you are truly lost, you can finally stop pretending. The man sat in silence. The master began to speak softly. There is a way you look at the world, he said, as if it owes you an answer, as if the world is a locked box and the right key is hidden in someone else's pocket. The man listened. The master said, this is how you look at yourself too, as if there is a secret you must find, as if you are a problem. The man felt the truth of it. He had lived like that for years. The master said, Zen is not a key. It is the moment you stop demanding a key. The man swallowed. The master said, look at the sky. The man looked up. It was night. The moon was there. The master said, did my finger create it? No, the man said. The master said, did my finger place it there? No, the master said. Then why do you cling to the finger? The man looked at his own mind. He saw how it clung to words, to methods, to systems, to beliefs. He saw how it turned every teaching into another possession. The master said, the teaching is not a possession. It is a direction. The man nodded. The master said, and even direction must be dropped. The man asked, dropped into what? The master said, into what is already here. They sat together. The man noticed his breath. He noticed the cool air. He noticed the moon. He noticed the mind trying to name it. He noticed the naming. And in that noticing, for a few seconds, there was no need to possess. The moon was simply the moon. The master was simply the master. The man was simply sitting. Later, the man would try to tell the story to someone else. He would find the words inadequate. He would feel the mind reaching for the finger again. But he would also remember the moon. He would remember that the finger was never the point. And yet, the habit of staring at the finger returned in subtle forms. The man would sit to meditate and find himself counting minutes. He would judge the session as good or bad. He would search for a particular feeling. He would hear a sound and wonder if it meant something. He realized that the mind could turn anything into a finger, even silence, even calm, even the idea of the moon. One afternoon he returned to the master and confessed, I keep turning everything into a method. I keep making a system. I keep trying to do it right. The master listened. Then the master asked, who wants to do it right? The man felt the question hit the same place as the earlier stories. He searched for the one. He found a tightness, a nervous hunger, a desire for safety. The master said, the one who wants to do it right is afraid. The man nodded. The master said, do not hate that one. The man looked up. The master continued, "If you hate fear, you make fear stronger. If you try to crush it, it becomes clever. It hides behind spiritual language." The man understood. He had been trying to erase fear, and in doing so, he had made fear the center of his practice. The master said, "Let fear sit with you. Let it drink tea. Let it speak. Do not obey it. Do not fight it. Just see it." The man felt tears rise again. He did not wipe them away quickly. He let them be part of the moment. The master said, "When you stare at the finger, you are usually trying to avoid something. You want the teaching to protect you from life." The man whispered, "Yes." The master nodded. "Zen does not protect you," he said. "Zen reveals you." The man sat quietly. The master pointed once more, not at the moon this time, but at the man's own breath. "Listen," he said. The man listened. Breath entered. Breath left. No achievement. No special effect. Just movement. The man felt the truth of it. The breath had been happening his whole life, without permission. The master said, "Life is already practicing you." The man smiled. He realized that all his effort had been an attempt to control what could not be controlled. He could not control the wind. He could not control the moon. He could not control the mind. But he could see, and in seeing, he could loosen. Chapter 6. The Gate. Without a gate. A student once asked a master, "What is the gate to freedom?" The master said, "There is no gate." The student felt despair. If there was no gate, how could he enter? He asked, "Then how do I cross?" The master said, "Who is trying to cross?" The student sat with the question for days. He tried to answer with ideas. He tried to answer with theories about self and no self. He tried to answer with metaphors. Each time the master shook his head. "Not that," the master said. The student grew exhausted. His mind felt like a dog chasing its tail. One night, the student sat alone in the meditation hall. The lantern light was low. The floor was cold. He listened to the wind outside. He remembered the flag story. He remembered the tea spilling. He remembered washing the bowl. He remembered the moon in the water. He remembered the finger. He realized that in every story, the same movement happened. A mind reached, a master cut, a moment opened. He realized that he had been trying to cross into a different life, a life without pain, without confusion, without fear. But he was already alive. He was already here. The next morning, the master came into the hall. He sat across from the student. The master said, "Tell me about the gate." The student opened his mouth. Then he closed it. He did not know what to say. The master waited. The student finally said, "I cannot find it." The master nodded. "Good," he said. The student almost smiled. The word no longer felt like a door closing. It felt like a door that had never been there. The master said, "You think freedom is a place you arrive, but freedom is the end of arriving." The student listened. The master said, "When you stop trying to cross, you notice you are already on both sides." The student felt something loosen, not a dramatic revelation, more like a knot untying. He looked at the master. He saw wrinkles. He saw eyes. He saw a human being. He looked at himself. He saw breath. He saw thought. He saw feeling. He looked at the room. He saw light. He saw dust in the air. Everything was ordinary, and yet it felt completely unguarded. The master said, "The gateless gate is not a concept. It is the moment you see that your grasping was the gate." The student said softly, "Then what do I do now?" The master smiled. "Wash your bowl," he said. The student laughed. not because it was clever, but because it was true. He stood, bowed, and went to the kitchen. He washed his bowl. He felt the water. He felt the breath. He heard the wind. He did not need to name it. He did not need to cross. And in the simple act of washing, he understood something without words. Not a trophy, not a theory, just the quiet fact of being here. But the student did not stay in that clarity forever. No one does. Some days later, he found himself irritated by another monk. The other monk was loud. The other monk talked too much. The other monk corrected him in public. The student felt heat rise. The mind began to build a case. He should not speak that way. He should know better. He is disrespectful. I am right. The student noticed the story as it formed. He noticed how quickly he wanted to turn irritation into an identity. He remembered the tea spilling. He remembered the flag. He remembered the bowl. He remembered the moon. He realized that practice was not something that happened only in quiet rooms. Practice was this moment, the moment the mind tried to harden. He went to wash his bowl. The action was simple: water, ceramic, a small circle of movement. As he washed, he felt the anger shift. It did not vanish, but it changed texture. It became less sharp. He realized that when he returned to the body, the mind had less room to build a courtroom. That night, he dreamed of a gate made of smoke. In the dream, he tried to push it open. It slipped through his hands. He tried to find its hinges. There were none. He woke with a feeling of laughter in his chest. In the morning, he asked the master, "How do I live this in the world?" The master said, "You live it by failing and returning." The student said, "That sounds endless." The master nodded. "Yes," he said, "and so is the wind." The student bowed. He began to see that the endlessness was not a curse. It was life itself. The mind would move. The world would change. The body would age. The wind would keep returning. The practice was not to reach a final state where nothing ever disturbed him. The practice was to recognize the disturbance without becoming it. The master said, "Freedom is not a place where the wind stops. Freedom is the ability to hear the wind without being blown away." The student carried this sentence like a small warm stone. When he felt anxious, he remembered the moon. When he felt proud, he remembered the spilling tea. When he felt lost, he remembered the bowl. And when he felt the mind reaching for the gate, he remembered the gate that was not a gate. He realized slowly that the stories were not separate. They were one teaching, seen from different angles. Empty your cup. Notice the movement of mind. Return to the simple task. Do not grasp the reflection. Do not worship the finger. Stop searching for a gate. In the end, nothing magical was added to his life. And that was the miracle. The wind still moved the trees. The monks still moved through their tasks. The flag still snapped in the courtyard, and the world continued. No gate, no crossing, only this. And if you listen closely, you can feel how these stories want to keep working on you, even after the words end. The mind will try to turn them into a lesson you can memorize. It will try to turn them into a quote you can repeat. It will try to turn them into a personality. I am the kind of person who understands Zen. That is the cup filling again. So let the cup fill and let it empty. Let it happen without drama. When you notice yourself rehearsing the tea story, return to your breath. When you notice yourself searching for the moon, look at what is already in front of you. When you notice yourself demanding a gate, feel your feet on the ground. You do not need to solve the wind. You do not need to own the sky. You do not need to catch the reflection. You only need to notice the moment the mind grabs, and then, gently, let go. Not as a heroic act, not as a performance, as a simple return. You can practice this tonight, right now. Not by forcing silence, but by allowing sound. Not by chasing calm, but by noticing the need to chase. Not by becoming perfect, but by seeing the wish to be perfect. A cup can be full and still be useful, and the cup can be emptied without violence. You empty it by noticing the moment you are trying to fill it with certainty. You empty it by noticing the moment you are trying to fill it with control. You empty it by noticing the moment you are trying to fill it with a story about who you are supposed to be. This noticing is gentle, but it is sharp. It does not need to shout. It does not need to win. It simply sees. And when it sees, the grip loosens. A mind can move and still be clear. A life can be ordinary and still be awake. If you are tired, let tiredness be here. If you are restless, let restlessness be here. If you are peaceful, let peace be here. Do not turn any of it into a badge. Just look. And notice how looking is different from thinking about looking. Thinking about looking is another way to delay, another way to stay in the head. It feels productive, but it is often just another layer of fog. Looking is immediate. It is the texture of the present before you turn it into a plan. If the mind insists on commentary, let it comment. Do not fight it. But do not confuse the commentary with the sky. Return again and again to what is directly felt. A sound, a breath, a sensation, a simple task. And if, after all of this, you remember only one thing, let it be the simplest one. Not because it is small, but because it is honest. A simple instruction can hold a lifetime when you stop trying to turn it into a theory. A simple instruction can meet you when you are tired, when you are proud, when you are lost, when you are certain, when you are confused. It does not change. It does not flatter. It does not argue. So take it as a quiet companion, not as a slogan. And if you forget, that is not failure. Forgetting is part of being human. The practice is simply remembering again and again, gently. Return. When you have eaten, wash your bowl. This was a quiet archive story, where the story ends, sleep begins,